All right, everybody. With us this week, we're joined by Super Bowl champion, author, speaker, Malcolm Mitchell. Malcolm Mitchell joins the podcast thanks to John Duke Logan, and we are so happy to have you on. Talk about what you're up to, what you're working on, and of course to just recap your career as a whole. So, Malcolm, welcome to the podcast, and how's everything going?
Man, I'm happy to be here. This is pretty cool. I'm excited to have this conversation and see what adventure it takes us on. Everything's going well. I'm living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have retired from sports. So I focus on three things primarily. My nonprofit, Share the Magic Foundation. I do write books for Scholastic Publishing House, but I also do some writing on the side. And I am a public speaker. So I travel around the country talking about the importance of literacy in under-resourced communities. So it's a lot different than chasing balls around on the field. They're running away from 300-pound men trying to tackle me, but I enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun.
A little bit of a safer career, I'd say.
It's much safer. I don't run into many people who are trying to run into me.
So, Will, is this NFL player number 3 or 4? Because Marcus Ogden, Quentin Demps, and Malcolm.
Number 3.
Number 3. Congrats. You're the third NFL player to make an appearance on the show, Malcolm.
I appreciate it. Did any of those other guys win a Super Bowl?
Quentin Demps.
Demps definitely won one.
I was looking for my competitive advantage.
That's all right. So let's start with the young Malcolm Mitchell. So, you're obviously a Georgia native. You're back in Atlanta, and you attended the University of Georgia. We're Bulldogs from Bryant, Bulldogs from Georgia. I'll take the comparison there. But before attending school there, was your goal always to be a professional football player, or did you have other interests in mind?
Honestly, I did not know the concept of being a professional athlete. I think as a kid, you hear people always glorifying it. And, in Valdosta, football reigned supreme. I always said the pecking order for priorities was football, faith, then family, instead of faith, family, and football. And I was just like every other child in that community. I gravitated toward playing sport. I did not fully understand the path it could take me out on life. I didn't understand the platform opportunities it would present. It's just something that I really enjoyed doing with friends. And as I got older and older and began to see people have those experiences, whether it was going to a university or being drafted and playing the NFL, that's when it became an ambition of mine. Once I saw tangible evidence that it was a real option. So it wasn't until I got to college that the ideal of being a professional athlete really set in, and it's something that I was striving to accomplish. Before that time, I think I was just growing up that youthful, rebellious kid who liked to hit people, catch passes, and have a good time with friends. I really believe it was that simple as related to my thought process, and that evolved over time, of course.
So you grew up in Valdosta, Georgia, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is you're a Georgia guy, and you get to put on the Georgia uniform to play college football. I mean, what did that mean to you? Were you a Georgia fan growing up? Like, was that something as your football journey started to accelerate, you maybe thought like, wow, I'd love to wear the Georgia uniform, play for Mark Richt, like all that stuff? Or how did that process go that you ended up at Georgia, and how special was that for you that you did get to rep your home state?
I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I did not watch a drop of football growing up. So I was into, and this probably explains why I became a picture book author. I was into cartoons and anime, Dragon Ball Z and SpongeBob SquarePants. And, I was fascinated with art and things like that. I just happened to go outside one day and, be a decent athlete. The truth is, growing up, the first sport I participated in was karate. Now, most people don't consider that a sport, but it takes a lot of athleticism to pull off some of those moves. I have an older brother. His name is Marquise Mitchell. He's 1 year older than I, and he played football, and he was extraordinary, right? I mean, he was so good that they made him bring his birth certificate to every football game because they could not believe he was that age performing that well. Now, I didn't have such a lucky start. All mine came from, hard work and waking up early and staying up late. But after watching my brother and seeing how people gravitated towards him playing football, and I mean, nobody, maybe my mother and my mother only attended my karate matches. I decided that the next year I would go out and play. So they tell you jealousy doesn't pay off, but in this situation, it actually took me a very long way.
Isn't that crazy? Like how most people, it's sort of backwards, right? They like grow up saying, I want to be a football player. Like I want to go be a professional athlete. And then they ended up into stuff like, that they didn't think they'd end up doing.
Right.
And it's almost backwards for you. You're like, yeah, I'm watching all these cartoons and then, oh, I'm accidentally a Division I football player and now I'm playing for the Patriots.
Now I will say that I love the game of football and I love everything about it. So once I began to play, a different sense of accountability, love, and respect for the game began to form and take place. So I practiced hard. I worked hard. I went to weightlifting. Anytime we did conditioning work, I was always running the hardest I could run. So it wasn't an accident of how I got there, but I did not choose to go down that path. In some ways, I believe God just led me there through divine intervention and some other things.
And when did you know in your career, while at Georgia, that, all right, the NFL is actually in play for me?
Oh, I knew after my freshman year because the game, I think it was me being able to transition from the way I played in high school into me being able to easily transition into college because I started as a true freshman. And I figured that at that point, okay, then I have a skill set to compete. And I knew how determined I was. So I was plagued by injuries along the way. But I think after my freshman year, I knew I had an ability to go on and continue to play for a while if I wanted to.
Yeah,
that was inherent talents too, right? Because if I'm a freshman being able to play, and the guy that was standing beside me gets drafted, and I know I'm better than him, well, then I'm just making the assumption that, I must be presented with an opportunity like that.
Yeah, I mean, not too shabby of a freshman year. Freshman All SEC at 126 yards over Tennessee, and then ended up getting 45 grabs for 665 yards. It's pretty impressive freshman year for sure in a loaded SEC. The rest of the time at Georgia, any teammates that stand out? I mean, you had some really high quality talent, that was surrounded with you at Georgia. But anybody that maybe you got really close with that's having a long career in the NFL now, or any good memories from I guess off that, what's your favorite memory from Georgia too?
Yeah, man, a lot of those guys have become my lifelong friends. I can name a bunch of them: Damian Swan, Marlon Herrera, Todd Gurley, Keith Marshall, Jonathan Rumpf, Josh Dawson. I mean, the list goes on. Kennard Johnson, Sheldon Dawson. I mean, you form relationships with all of those people, especially the class you were drafted. I mean, not drafted, but recruited into. So the bonds last much deeper than the ones you create in the NFL because I guess you're still kids in college just playing for the love of the game with some financial and other ambitions. The guy who stands out to me the most, and I still consider him the top 3 football players I've ever seen, is Todd Gurley. And I think what made him so astounding was Todd would not feel like being great, and he would still be great. He would wake up and he'd verbally announce that he was not in a great mood and he didn't feel like playing that day. And then he'd go out there, rush for 250 yards and have 3 touchdowns. So he had a different switch and a different gear that allowed him to perform at a level that, the other two is Rob Gronkowski and obviously Tom Brady. But if I'm naming the top 3 players I have ever played with, those 3 are the top 3. And obviously there are other extraordinary talents out there, but for me, that I witnessed those 3 with my own eyes.
And that's a perfect transition to obviously you landed on the Patriots right after your college career, 4th round draft pick. Was there ever a moment that, were the Patriots all on you in the beginning? Like, did you hear some rumblings of some other teams, or was it New England and that was your next home?
Well, New England took the most thorough approach to the process. I remember when they came in, I think it was right before Pro Day, and we sat down and we had a visit. I think it was Nick Caserio at the time. And we went through plays, and he was asking me what I was thinking, what was the quarterback's progression, what was the offensive line responsibilities. And I was able to answer the questions fairly well until you got to the offensive line, and then I was a bit confused. But just seeking out what was best for the overall team was something that they did. Something else that they did that I'm not sure was quite legal, but we took our top 30 visits, and the top 30 visit is basically any teams who are interested in you have an opportunity to bring you out before the draft day, right? And you can only, matter of fact, it may not be 30. I think you can only go to about 5 or 6 of them. I forget the number. But the Patriots call me up. And as soon as we get there, they take me in the meeting room with 3 other receivers. You know, they call it a coincidence, but I think they were just stacking us side by side, seeing who could perform the best under pressure. And they did a whole day one install of training camp. They put it up. They talked to us about it. Then they walked away. And they said, you have 10 minutes to study it. So I'm thinking, okay, after 10 minutes, we'll just take the little quiz or whatever they're going to give us, and we're good. No. After the 10 minutes, he comes in and says, okay, now go to lunch. Now, I was familiar with this tactic because all he was trying to do was get us to forget everything that we just learned. Immediately after lunch, we go upstairs and we do a walkthrough where we're basically walking through all the plays that they installed. And out of the 3 or 4 people that were there, I was the only one that remembered all 3 positions. Now, the way I was able to do that, I call it coding. Instead of remembering the routes, I just associated them with a phrase. So all I had to do was remember the phrase. And that would tell me what everyone had to do. And after I felt like I aced that test, I knew that I had an opportunity to go to that team. Another team that was very interested was the Falcons. Because they actually had me work out as a defensive back as well on Pro Day. So I figured it would be one of those 2. I was hoping to go in the top 3 rounds, but end up dropping to the 4th, which is okay.
So we've had, obviously that led to a pretty fruitful couple of years with the Patriots, all things considered. I mean, we've had Olympic medals on this show. We've had championship trophies. We've had a bunch of accolades. So we ask every single person who's had one of these, where do you keep your ring? Do you keep it like close by, or is it stashed away?
Honestly, you usually just put it in a safe.
Yeah.
Or you put it in like you have deposit box at banks is the safest place to put it, in my opinion.
So we'll cross out the next part of can you show us then, but if you had it accessible, we were going to ask.
I may have an AFC championship ring around here. Now I'm a bit more loose about that one, but I mean they're all insured anyway, so.
Yeah. So Narrative Nation, though, you ended up playing a Super Bowl against that hometown team.
Yeah, but I wasn't a fan anyway, so I didn't matter.
Yeah.
And ironically, I am a fan today. I am a fan of the Patriots for obvious reasons, and I watch the Falcons game every time that they play. I mean, living in the city, you almost don't have many options. And I didn't grow up in Atlanta. So my affection for the teams was non-existent. So, but now I live here and kind of drenched in the Atlanta culture. You know, you become enthralled by going to the games and watching them play and following the team. So I am a fan of the Falcons now.
And I want to talk about the run to the Super Bowl, right? I mean, obviously you came in, you made your debut 2016. You emerge as an option, right? Like a reliable option for this wide receiver core. And then, all of a sudden, everybody knows what ended up happening that year. You know, it's a meme now. It's on flags all over college campuses, right? Patriots win in overtime. They eclipse the 28-3 win. I mean, obviously, you guys knew you could win the game, right? There was no question about that the mood was, we're going to win this Super Bowl. But when did you think?
I'm not sure.
You don't think so? Interesting.
To say that we knew we were going to win is a bit.
Well, maybe not that you were gonna win, but that you weren't out necessarily.
Oh, now we believe that the whole time.
Yeah.
That much is true. We believe that the entire time that we were playing the game, that we were not out of the game. And another thing that we believed also, we were adamant about not giving up. So regardless of how the game was progressing over time, laying down and quitting was not an option. So I think Bill did a great job of preparing us for those moments. I remember leading up to the game, he said the Super Bowl is 2 games. It's before halftime and after halftime. And the way you perform after halftime is going to determine the outcome. I think we kind of took that approach. So we walked into the locker room, not devastated, but trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to turn this thing around? But knowing we were going to win is a stretch. We knew we were not going to quit.
Right.
You know.
And then to zoom out to like from when did you know that this team could go all the way to the Super Bowl? Was that a goal that you?
As soon as Tom came back that year, he missed the first 4 games. I mean, the first game he came back, I think we were in Cleveland, and I said, "Whoa!" Now, I had played with him. I mean, I had practiced with him the entire off season and in training camp, so I knew his ability, right? And you know, I knew who he was. I knew his track record, but when he stepped in the games, it was like, this is something I've never seen before. He's one of the most competitive individuals I've ever met. And he knew how to rally his guys behind him in a way that we were just as committed as he was. He was the fearless leader that I think every corporation wants, every team wants, every well, maybe I don't know about the family thing, you know, but I definitely know he is the leader that everybody wants on their team, regardless of what their team is focused on accomplishing.
And before we talk about the next part of your career, you know, speaking of guys like Brady, you mentioned Gronkowski, obviously Coach Bill Belichick. Were there any takeaways or lessons that you learned from guys like that or people you played with that helped you in this next stage of your life and career?
Yeah, Bill Belichick was, you know, I grew up without a father at home for majority of my childhood. And I think Bill Belichick was that father figure that implemented accountability and responsibility on a level that I had never witnessed before. I took those things with me, even the approach to, you know, accomplishing goals or accomplishing objectives. So, yeah, out of all of those experiences and all the players I played with, the things that he taught and the way that he led the team is something that I ponder on today and I try to implement within my organization.
And then, of course, you know, the decision to retire from football, you had the knee injuries. When you made that decision, was it a blind decision of like, okay, my body's telling me I'm done and I need to figure out my next steps? Or did you have something in mind? You know, for example, obviously your writing career and your public speaking that you're like, okay, I know that I can fall into this next step and let's go 100% with this.
Retiring is one of the toughest things I've ever done. Before the decision, during the decision, and even afterwards, it was brutal because the lens in which you see the world has to shift drastically, and because you've accomplished those things, great, but you know that you're no longer doing those things, right? That's not going to determine your next step in life. So coming to terms with that was difficult. I did not make that decision lightly, and it was due to my body. I think there are still some physical components that I was still going to be able to catch, right? But the day in and day out grind that it took to get on that field every weekend to play, that is what I could no longer do because of the injuries that I sustained throughout my career. And I had no idea what I would do. You know, I never thought that, you know, being a nonprofit leader or, you know, growing up, that's not cool. That's not sexy. I mean, you know, you don't say that. I mean, how many kids have you met in first grade, you asked them, what do you want to be when they grow up? They say a nonprofit leader. I've never heard that. And I go to thousands of schools, So it was more so about growing up and seeing the world from a different perspective, because I wasn't a kid playing this game anymore, and really trying to find some financial dependency in other things and developing new skills. I think God planted these seeds and he nurtured them subconsciously as I was progressing in life. So, yes, I did at some point turn to the things that I had been doing off the field. But when I made that choice, I was not thinking about those things leading me down the path of life that I'm at now, if that makes any sense. And plus,
Yeah.
the vision is too. Football is American football is the most popular televised show form of entertainment in the country. So you tell me something else I can do that compares to that.
Right. And it makes perfect sense, right? And I think that's a really good segue, and it's a real powerful transition to that next part of your life, right? So you,
Yeah.
Malcolm, you struggled with reading, at a young age and even into college. So I think it says a lot about you that you overcame that and then went on to literally become a writer and an author and a public speaker, right? So what were, if you're comfortable sharing, of course, what were some of those difficulties like when, you did struggle with reading, and how did you work to overcome that and eventually find out, like, all right, I can do this, to the level I want to, and I can use this to sort of gain the skill to get where I want to be in that next step?
Yeah, it was a bit embarrassing. And it's not like anyone knew. I mean, I knew, right? And my mom always encouraged me to exercise every aspect of myself and be the best me holistically. And she taught me at a very young age being the best athlete you can be and being the best person you can be are two different things. So I grew up understanding those principles. And once I got to college, I was thrusted into a different environment where I saw students value their education. They were able to make the connection between academic performance and economic opportunities of real sustainability, right? And I think based on the culture that I grew up in, the ideal of money was, you make a lot of it and you spend a lot of it, right? But once I got to the University of Georgia, there were other principles that began to seep in. And I realized that if I wanted to have any sustainable success in life, if I wanted to maximize my potential as a human being, I needed to be a reader. That way, every piece of information was a tool that I could use to help me make the next decision in life. And without that, it's really hard to be a fully functional citizen in society. And some of the challenges that kind of set my radar off was closed captions. I was having a hard time reading closed captions, and I had to keep pausing the movie for an extended amount of time trying to figure out what was going on. Grocery shopping. I was picking up the wrong items in the grocery store. Or anytime that there was an opportunity to read aloud in class, man, I'd be paralyzed with fear. I'd start sweating instantaneously. And those were the cues that I used to kind of help me understand that I needed to take a different approach. And it was tough because in some cases it was hard to justify. Because while I'm walking around feeling less than because I'm having a hard time reading Edgar Allan Poe, the professors are asking to take photos with me. Right? So trying to find value in education and emotional intelligence while having this ability on the field that captured so many people's attention. It's like, well, why should I read? I get to date any person I want. I get to go anywhere I want and eat for free, probably. Tell me why I need to read. And until I was able to answer that question for myself, I didn't engage in the activity. But once I engaged in the activity, even in college, I realized that it was more powerful than playing sports.
And what was that moment that made you say, hey, I need to make this effort into my life? And then were there any books, authors, people that helped you along the way that really kicked that inspiration?
Yeah, I joined a book club. and it was actually aired on CBS Morning News because I was the only male, the only one of my generation, and the only one of my ethnic background in the book club. Um, and those women really helped me find a love for reading outside of my initial interpretation of what it meant to be a reader. Um, it was called Silverleaf Book Club. I'll never forget them. Some of them are on the board of my foundation at this very moment. And one I actually named in one of the picture books that I wrote. They played a incremental role in me becoming the reader that I have become. Some of the books that encouraged me was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, the Harry Potter series. There are books written by, I think Malcolm X by autobiography was one that really encouraged me because he was a person who started with a rough background, but through education and learning while he was incarcerated, he came out a transformed individual. And, all the stories that I read give me a bit of greater perspective on life, give me a bit of greater perspective on people and their circumstances, help me build empathy and look at the world holistically outside of my isolated experiences. And I cherish those things because it made me a more well-rounded individual. And I would take that over, playing 10 years in the NFL. Not because the NFL is not worth it. That's not what I'm trying to communicate. It is worth it. In fact, I would say that played a huge role in you wanting me on this podcast, So I'm not devaluing the importance of football in my life. But what I am trying to communicate is that there are things out there greater and more powerful than the ideal of being a professional athlete. I would say do them both. Don't do one and not do the other.
Right on, absolutely.
It makes perfect sense. And you were talking about authors and stuff. You became one, right? You wrote a book, The Magician's Hat, that you've now showcased to children and schools across the nation, and even while you were with the Patriots as well. This was something that came up too. First of all, we've got to ask the premise behind the book, and how did you get into this world of magic as well? Like, what was your connection or maybe admiration for that to maybe say, all right, that's the first book I'm going to write?
Once reading started having an impact on the way I thought, the way I analyzed information, the way I thought critically about situations, I thought it was very important for me to share it with people in a culturally relevant way that would help them embrace it. So they can unlock the potential of their lives. So I had this crazy idea one day. I said, I'm going to write a picture book because I actually use picture books to help me build my vocabulary and learn sentence structure and punctuation. So I wanted to do for others what books had done for me, and that was to inspire, expose, and hopefully educate. So while I was in college, I authored The Magician's Hat as a means to inspire kids to read. I'm thankful today that my foundation has distributed over 60,000 books to communities across the nation. Not just The Magician's Hat, but the other book I wrote, which is my very favorite book in the whole wide world. That's the title. And we've impacted over 600,000 young lives. That includes at least one classroom in every state and 7 other countries. So me becoming an author was my attempt to, one, model the importance of being literate, but 2, hopefully create content in a meaningful way that engage communities.
That's beautiful. And I mean, the book obviously then parlayed into your foundation, the Magic Foundation.
Exactly.
We got the magic theme that is still here, and you're inspiring kids to read. So describe that purpose. You mentioned obviously the impact that it's done, but what are some of the efforts that you have worked on over the past couple of years to build this foundation to where it is today?
Yeah, I take in a lot of my personal experience with education and some of the things that I would have hoped for along my journey. So I created in-school programs And we usually use those as models to introduce book ownership into the lives of students. Most people don't know in under-resourced communities, 1 in every 300 students have age-appropriate books at home. So you can yell, read and be literate, or why aren't you educated? But if children don't have materials at home to continue to foster that growth outside of school, well, you see a decline over time. We also created virtual reading challenges, which is a platform for educators to engage their students in literacy-based activities. Simply said, what I did was I took the aspect of sport and reading, and I combined them to create incentivized reading challenges for teachers to use in their classroom. And in those, we've had over 500,000 students participate since 2016. And those are a lot of fun. They definitely help teachers engage their students as curriculum enhancers. We also have a lot of partnerships where we partner with local, national, or international organizations to bring some of the resources that we curate and house to communities. This past year, 2022, I was appointed to the House Study Committee for my work in the community in Georgia, where we studied literacy-based practices to see which was most effective and impactful. Honestly, I think the only reason I'm here able to have a coherent conversation with all of you, and hopefully in a way that it makes sense, is because of my love for reading. It just exposed me to so many different perspectives and so many different avenues of life that you kind of look in the mirror and you say, you can be literally whatever you want to be, like magic. And it sounds silly and it sounds very childish, but based on my experience, it's real.
And you mentioned a couple of awards you received, right? And you've received a lot of them. Let's be very clear, right? You got the Key to the City from your hometown. You got a Promise Hero Award from Colin Powell. You were a Children's Author of the Year. You have a TEDx talk. It goes on and on. But there's got to be a more rewarding piece for you, right? I'm sure there's something that sticks out. Like, what's the most rewarding part for you personally of all of this work?
Man, I've never thought about it.
Right, because there's so much of, I don't know, you seem like a guy that, you'd say, hey, all the awards are nice, but like the fact that, I mean, look at the impact you've made for all these 600,000 students, right? Like, what's the most rewarding part about that figure to you that you were able to help all these kids and continue to do so?
I think it's hard for me to think in terms of, what do I appreciate most, because that's not my natural. I don't know. I want to answer the question with, an easy answer just to say something, but I think I don't know. Maybe I don't have the intellectual capacity to think that far out, right? What is 600,000 students? How do you visualize that in a way you can appreciate it, right? Do you think of about 600,000 kids on an island? You say, oh, that's cool. Here's what I just want to do the best that I can with the information that I have to inspire, encourage, and get people attempting to be their best, right? My mom did that was better than anything else she could have done for me. Is she gave me the ability to have hope. And I think the world could use a lot of that. And not that I'm the world savior or anything like that, but if I can give, those students hope, if I can inspire them to run an extra lap, to read an extra book, to try to be their absolute best, then I'll do whatever it takes to do that based off the information that I have. And the information that I have right now tells me that reading is the most self-empowering tool a person could possess. You tell me something else. In fact, the most influential book ever written, you got to read it, right? The only person that's ever gotten close to outselling the Bible is Harry Potter, and you can watch the movies, but you still can't fully internalize the concepts unless you can read it. And I'm not telling people to go out and read the dictionary. I read picture books. In fact, I can show you. I have like 10 right here beside me, right? This is what I read. I'm not reading, 1,000-page books every day or anything like that. I enjoy stories. I enjoy historical fiction and it teaches me things. But just having the ability to dissect text, internalize it, and apply it to your life in a way that helps you move in the direction that you want. I mean, that's a skill that can't be replaced by anything else. You can't buy that. You got to do the work yourself.
Now, your focus has been primarily on the children's side. Have you ever thought, being a young adult that realized that you were making the change, that I need to also focus my efforts onto young adults as well? Or is that just something part of the bigger picture of, Share the Magic Foundation?
We moved into the middle and high school space last year, and where I started engaging with those students a bit more. And I actually trying to write a middle grade book now for students to hopefully create some content that they may be interested in. I think beyond high school, I may have a bit of imposter syndrome when I think about that, because in some ways I still feel like I'm not a child by any means, but I've been out of football for a few years now, and there's been a huge learning curve that I'm still going through. But if anybody ever wants to have a conversation with me or talk on a small scale, I'm always open and willing to do that as long as time permits. And I'll share any information that I have. If you have the right question, I'll give you the whole answer to the best of my ability. And that is extended to anyone. So
Love that. And we got to ask, because obviously we got connected from our friend John Duke Logan.
Yeah, man.
He was doing magic in the locker room way back when. Is that how you guys met and decided to move forward?
So John Duke Logan he worked in the media department, but he doubled as the team magician. And he would put on shows after practice. And one time I was invited to do a show with him, and he did this ridiculous Dorito trick that I still hadn't figured out. Somehow he got a card in the bag, and
that sounds like John.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, my foundation had already began. We started the foundation before I was drafted to the Patriots, so we already had these programs in place. And one of the programs was called a reading rally, which is basically a pep rally for reading. And I bring in a magician to perform some tricks for the students to kind of follow the magical theme of reading, right? And the title of the book was The Magician's Hat, so it all synced up pretty well. Well, I had a magician go rogue on me. If you never worked with a magician before, don't get in the business.
Made himself disappear? That's not good.
I mean, they have their idiosyncrasies like every other person. It's just intensified. So I went to John and I said, listen, man, I could really use your help. I have a program where we focus on the importance of reading. We usually use a magician. He says, well, I've never done tricks for students and children. And I said, buddy, you will figure it out. And from that day, I've used him for every program that I've done. And I believe him and I have done over 60 at this point.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny he says that, because he's, doing magic tricks to you, like Eric Blunt, Gronk, Tom Brady. And he's like, I don't know, kids. Like,
exactly. He really said, I got to think about that, man. I don't have tricks for kids. And I was like, buddy, just come up with something.
Don't forget, this is the same guy that was doing them at the bar when we went to school with him. Come on.
And by the way, I'm married now, but before I got married, I used to take him out with me. And I would say that was my party trick. They said, Malcolm, what you got? I got a magician with me.
That's a pretty solid wingman, not gonna lie. Just
my second
magician on retainer.
Listen, he'll never let you down. You just give him some tequila and he'll do it.
That's a spirit. I like that.
Yeah,
I remember the first time John did a magic trick. It was at the Thirsty Beaver Wheel at Rhode Island, and that was like the first time I had really ever seen it. And to Malcolm's point, a couple of tequilas, you're sort of the reactions get a little like, whoa, oh my god, and my jaw dropped. My jaw actually dropped. I'm like, I can't fathom how you do this. Right? It's incredible.
I've seen him pull off some tricks in some late nights, and I'm like, buddy, I don't even know how you're functioning. Get along doing sleight of hand.
That's the magic, baby. That is the magic.
But he's a great guy. I love everything about him. He's been a true blessing and gift to my foundation, to my life. Period. Like I say, we take these week-long trips where sometimes we're spending a week together in Louisiana or all over the place, California, you name it, and it's given me opportunity to get to know him and what he stands for. And he's just as invested in this mission as I am. And he loves working with those students, and he loves being an inspiration for them. And most people would assume that because I have the Super Bowl title that I have the biggest impact. Well, no, because kids usually can't quantify that and don't care. All right, they care while you're there. Why are you here and what are you doing? And when John takes that stage and motivates those students through his magic, it truly is magical to see. I encourage both of you to come check one out with us so you can get an experience of, what he does for communities.
100%. And as your foundation grows, this recently came about that you have a new partnership with Cox.
That's right.
So I'd love to hear more about that, what that entails, and how did this all come to play?
Yeah, I think as my platform begins to grow outside of football, that I've been able to be one of the voices out in the community, hopefully, inspiring and infusing that hope into the lives of people through, information that I gained from the world that I live in today. I formed a partnership with Cox a couple years ago. I became their digital equity spokesperson to talk about the importance of having internet access in low-income communities. I think COVID sped up the process of us seeing the internet not as a luxury but a necessity, especially as it becomes more embedded in our educational systems. So I signed on to do that again this year. And hopefully we are able to encourage some funding in particular areas so those students can engage with the internet in a meaningful way. You think about exposure being the name of the game. I say people are made up of three things. Their DNA, usually can't change that. Your environment, that's sometimes hard to change depending on your financial capacity. And then your experiences. And let's use experience and exposure the same, right? I am exposed to more based on my ability to read. Because while I may be physical in one spot, because I can read different material, I'm exposed to things outside of my community that gives me a greater scope of understanding. Well, think about the internet being that same method of exposure if it's used strategically. Instead of asking it to find a local coffee shop, you ask the question like, how do you self-publish a book? And it will tell you the answer. And all you have to do is create a checklist and follow each step, and eventually you'll get where you want to be. So anyway, that's some of the work that I'm doing with Cox.
Love it. Yeah. It's incredible stuff. Goals for this year, and maybe even the next 5. You've got to. You're obviously doing a lot of great stuff with the foundation, still, speaking to students and whatnot. Is there anything you want to accomplish this year and, maybe looking out to the next 5 as well?
Yeah, I would love to publish 2 books this year, a picture book and a young adult book. I would love for my foundation to have a bigger international presence and even a bigger national presence as well. I would love to expand our programs into thousands and thousands of students. Last year, we reached over 200,000 students with our programs. I'd love to do 500,000 this year. and we're in a good spot. We're at 200 now, so got a little ways to go. I think I want to continue to learn. I'm still a young and new father, so understanding how to be a dad and the roles and responsibilities that come along with that. I'm a new husband, so that comes along with its own boy. Oh boy, are you two married?
We are not. No.
Man, hold off on it.
We'll tell the missuses to not listen to this episode of Beers Business.
Yeah.
No, I tell her all the time. I did hold off. I did. I was 29 when I did it. I held off. Now, I love her more than anything. I wouldn't take it back, but it's a lot of responsibility. You know what I'm saying? So make sure you're ready for that. And that's it.
A pretty big list. That's a pretty big list. Not too bad. Not too bad. So as we close out the show, we always like to ask people for, their words of wisdom, and you sprinkled it throughout our entire conversation, but you had to stop something you love because of injuries. You made the most of it. You created a new opportunity for yourself. You created something that you truly never would have imagined. So what advice would you give to someone who might be in a similar position that you were at one point in your career? And, how do they get to where you are today?
First, understand that you're capable. And that if you're able to rise in one area, you can rise in another. You have to take the same principles that got you where you wanted to be and use those repeatedly over time to get you to your next destination in life. You do not have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most athletic. You don't have to have some superpower that people can acknowledge. All you have to have is effort and desire. And if you have those two things, I don't care what the circumstance is, you can get where you want to be. I am a man of faith, and I believe my faith has allowed me to sustain some psychological battles that I don't think I would have been able to get through alone. So I'll also say, find something that's greater than you. I'm not telling you what to believe in. I'm not telling you anything. I'm just giving advice. Find something to believe in that's much greater than yourself that you can rely on in difficult times. Because one thing I can guarantee you is difficult times will come. And you find that thing and you lean on it and you never give up. If you have effort, if you have desire, you have faith, I am telling you those three things will take you far, and they don't cost a single dollar. Those things are free. You just have to do the personal work to acquire them. And if you do, nothing will stop you. You will be truly unstoppable.
That is a fantastic message to close things out. Malcolm, can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. Where can listeners find more about your foundation? Where can they keep up with the things that you're doing? And how can they get involved with some of the things you're doing too?
You can find me on all social platforms at Read with Malcolm. And that's Malcolm with two L's, Malcolm, Read with Malcolm. And you can also go to my website, www.readwithmalcolm.com, to learn more about the foundation and the work that we're doing in communities. And if you ever have any thoughts, questions, just reach out. I'm not that difficult to find.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your message, sharing your story, and giving us an awesome conversation. So good luck with everything. We'll be obviously rooting along, and hopefully we'll get to stop by a high school soon and check out what this magic's all about.
I appreciate that. Tell John I said what's up.